She walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her heart racing with pure joy. The man of her dreams was waiting at the altar, ready to promise her forever. But in less than 12 hours, that same wedding dress would become evidence in a murder investigation. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about the person sleeping next to you. Because sometimes, the people we trust most are hiding the darkest secrets. And when those secrets come to light, the consequences can be deadly. How could a man live two completely different lives for 7 years without anyone knowing? How did a perfect wedding day turn into a crime scene? And most chilling of all, what drove a new husband to murder his bride on their wedding night? Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Our story begins 5 years ago in a small coffee shop in suburban Illinois. Emma Rodriguez was 28, a dedicated pediatric nurse with dreams of finding her soulmate and starting a family. She had shoulder-length dark hair, kind brown eyes, and the type of warm smile that made children feel safe during their scariest hospital visits. Emma had been single for 2 years after a difficult breakup. Her friends constantly tried setting her up, but she was content focusing on her career. That Tuesday morning in March, she was running late for work and desperately needed caffeine. That's when she literally bumped into David Mitchell. David was 41, tall and distinguished with graying temples that gave him a mature, trustworthy appearance. He wore expensive suits and drove a luxury sedan. When Emma's coffee spilled all over his shirt, he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed and insisted on buying her a replacement drink. "I should be apologizing to you," he said with a charming smile. "I wasn't watching where I was going." Emma was immediately drawn to his calm demeanor and old-fashioned politeness. They talked for 20 minutes, and she found herself completely captivated. David seemed different from the men she usually dated, more mature, more stable, more serious about life. He asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation. Their first date was at an upscale Italian restaurant. David pulled out her chair, opened doors, and treated her like a queen. He told her he worked in commercial real estate and traveled frequently for business. When she asked about his family, his expression grew somber. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Car accident. She was in a coma for weeks before we had to make the decision to let her go." Emma's heart broke for him. Here was a man who had experienced real loss, real grief. It explained his maturity, his appreciation for life's precious moments. What Emma didn't know was that at that exact moment, David's actual wife Linda was at home, probably watching television or preparing dinner, completely unaware that her husband of 23 years was on a date with another woman. David Mitchell wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was living an entirely fabricated existence. For 7 years, he had been maintaining 2 separate lives with surgical precision. His marriage to Linda had grown stale. They lived in a modest ranch house 40 miles outside the city. Linda worked part-time at a grocery store, and they had fallen into the routine of a couple who had simply stopped trying. They shared the same space but lived separate lives. Instead of getting a divorce, David chose a different path. He started telling people he was single, widowed, available. He opened separate bank accounts, got a second credit card, and even rented a small apartment across town that he used for his dates. Think about the level of planning this required. David had to remember which story he told to whom. He needed alibis for every evening out, explanations for every mysterious phone call, justifications for every unexplained expense. And somehow he made it work. With Emma, David became the man he wished he could be. He was attentive, romantic, emotionally available. He sent flowers to her workplace, remembered important dates, and slowly but methodically made himself indispensable to her happiness. 6 months into their relationship, Emma introduced David to her family. Her parents loved him. Her sister called him the perfect gentleman. Her brother, usually suspicious of Emma's boyfriends, shook David's hand and said, "Finally, someone good enough for my sister. But I want you to pause and think about this for a moment. How well do you really know the people in your life? Have you ever had someone completely fool you? Let me know in the comments what red flags you would watch for." 2 years into their relationship, David proposed to Emma during a weekend getaway to a mountain resort. He got down on one knee beside a lake at sunset, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. "Emma, you brought light back into my world when I thought I'd lost it forever," he said. "Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, she said yes. The engagement ring cost $8,000, money David had slowly been skimming from his joint account with Linda by claiming he needed cash for business expenses. Linda never questioned it. After 23 years of marriage, she trusted her husband completely. Emma immediately started planning their dream wedding. She wanted something elegant, but not too extravagant. David seemed supportive but strangely evasive about certain details. When Emma suggested they meet with the wedding planner together, David said his work schedule was too unpredictable. When she wanted to book the venue, he asked her to handle it. When she tried to discuss the guest list, he said he preferred small, intimate gatherings. "I just want to focus on you," he would say when she pressed for more involvement. "This is your day. I want everything to be exactly how you've always dreamed." Emma found his attitude romantic. She interpreted his hands-off approach as evidence of how much he trusted her judgment and wanted her to be happy. She had no idea that David was avoiding wedding planning because he was terrified of leaving a paper trail that could connect back to his real life. As the wedding date approached, David's deceptions became increasingly elaborate. When Emma asked about his family attending the ceremony, David's face grew sad. "Most of my relatives live on the West Coast," he explained. "And honestly, since my wife died, I've become distant from them. Too many painful memories. I hope you understand." Emma's heart ached for him. She suggested they could pay for his family to travel, but David shook his head. "I'd rather start fresh with your family," he said. "They've been so welcoming. It feels like home." The truth was that David's entire extended family lived within driving distance, and they all knew Linda very well. Having them at the wedding would expose everything. But here's what's truly chilling. During this same period, David was also lying to Linda about his increasing absences. He told her his real estate business was expanding, requiring more travel and late-night meetings. Linda, trusting and unsuspecting, supported what she believed was her husband's career advancement. David had created a schedule that let him spend 3 nights a week with Emma, while maintaining his normal routine with Linda. He told Emma he traveled for work. He told Linda he worked late or traveled for business. The two women who thought they knew David Mitchell best had never met and had no idea the other existed. Think about the psychological toll this must have taken. David was essentially living as 2 different people, constantly switching between personalities, remembering which version of himself he was supposed to be at any given moment. 3 months before the wedding, the stress of maintaining his double life began showing. Emma started noticing changes in David's behavior. He would sometimes take phone calls in private, stepping outside or into another room. When she asked about them, he would say they were work-related, but he seemed agitated afterward. He began making excuses to delay wedding planning meetings. When they finally met with the venue coordinator, David seemed nervous and kept checking his phone. "Is everything okay?" Emma asked after the meeting. "Just work stress," David replied. "But don't worry about me. I want this wedding to be perfect for you." The venue coordinator later told investigators that David had seemed unusually anxious during their meetings, especially when discussing the guest list and photography packages. He kept asking about discretion and privacy. But the biggest red flag came 6 weeks before the wedding, when Emma suggested they finally book their honeymoon. "Let me handle that," David said quickly. "I want it to be a surprise." When Emma protested that she'd like some input on their destination, David became irritated, the first time she'd ever seen him lose his composure. "Can't you trust me to plan one thing?" he snapped, then immediately apologized. "I'm sorry. Work has been stressful. I just want to give you something special." Emma forgave him, but the moment stuck with her. Later, she would realize it was the first crack in David's carefully constructed facade. What would you have done if you noticed your partner acting strangely before your wedding? Would you have pushed for answers, or would you have trusted them like Emma did? Share your thoughts below. October 15th was everything Emma had dreamed of. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air with brilliant blue skies. The venue, a historic mansion surrounded by golden trees, looked like something from a fairy tale. Emma wore her grandmother's pearls and carried white roses mixed with baby's breath. She looked radiant as her father walked her down the aisle toward the man she believed was her soulmate. David stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, watching his bride approach with what appeared to be complete adoration. To everyone watching, he looked like the happiest man alive. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma's maid of honor cried during the vows. Her mother dabbed her eyes with tissues. Even her typically stoic father got emotional when David promised to love and protect Emma, until death do us part. But here's what no one knew. Throughout the entire ceremony, David's phone was buzzing in his pocket with increasingly frantic text messages from Linda. Earlier that morning, Linda had tried calling David to remind him about dinner plans with her sister that evening. When he didn't answer, she became worried. David never ignored her calls. She texted, Where are you? Called 3 times. Then, getting worried. Please call me. Finally. David, I'm really concerned. This isn't like you. David felt every vibration but couldn't respond without raising suspicions. He was trapped between his two worlds, and they were beginning to collide. During the reception, David excused himself multiple times to check his phone. Emma noticed, but assumed he was dealing with work emergencies. She was too happy to let anything dampen her mood. The reception lasted until midnight. Emma danced with her new husband, posed for hundreds of photos, and celebrated with family and friends who kept telling her how lucky she was to find such a wonderful man. At 12:30 a.m., Mr. and Mrs. David Mitchell left for their wedding night at the luxury hotel downtown. Emma had no idea she had less than 2 hours to live. The Grand Continental Hotel was one of the city's most elegant establishments. David had booked the honeymoon suite, a lavish room with a king-size bed, marble bathroom, and city views. Emma was exhausted but happy. She changed into the beautiful white silk nightgown her bridesmaids had given her and was brushing her teeth when she heard David's phone ringing in the bedroom. Through the bathroom door, she heard him answer in a hushed voice. "Linda, I can't talk right now." Emma froze. Who was Linda? And why was her new husband whispering to another woman on their wedding night? She crept closer to the door and heard David say, "I know you're upset, but I can explain everything tomorrow. I promise." Then, "No, Linda, please don't do that. Just wait until I get home." Emma's stomach dropped. Home? Wasn't she his home now? She opened the bathroom door to find David frantically texting, his face pale and panicked. "Who's Linda?" Emma asked quietly. David's head snapped up. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then his expression shifted to something Emma had never seen before, cold calculation. It's complicated," he said slowly. "Complicated how?" Emma's voice was getting stronger. "David, who is Linda?" David set down his phone and looked at his new wife, this woman who had just promised to love him forever, who was standing there in her white silk nightgown, who had no idea her entire world was about to crumble. "She's my wife," he said quietly. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Emma felt like she couldn't breathe. "Your wife is dead," she whispered. "You told me she died in a car accident." David shook his head slowly. "She's very much alive, Emma. She's been calling all day because I missed dinner with her sister." What happened next was a conversation that would haunt investigators for months. We know some details from the evidence left behind, but much of what occurred in that hotel room died with Emma. According to phone records, Linda called David's phone 17 times between 1:15 a.m. and 1:47 a.m. She also sent numerous text messages, becoming increasingly desperate and threatening to call the police if David didn't respond. Emma later told the front desk clerk that she and her husband were having an argument, but she assured them everything was fine. That was at 1:52 a.m. Hotel security cameras showed no one entering or leaving the suite after the newlyweds arrived. What we know from the physical evidence is that Emma learned the full scope of David's deception during those final hours. Somehow, she discovered that David hadn't just lied about being married. He had been lying about everything. The business trips were visits to Emma. The late work nights were dates with Emma. The 7 years of grief counseling he claimed to be attending were actually 7 years of maintaining a relationship with another woman. Emma realized that her entire relationship, her engagement, even her wedding day had been built on lies. The man she had just married was a complete stranger. But here's the most heartbreaking part: Emma still loved him. Despite everything, she was willing to work through it. She begged David to leave Linda and start fresh with her. She promised they could move away, start over, build a real life together. David's response was not what she expected. At 2:23 a.m., the hotel's front desk received a call from room 1247, the honeymoon suite. "This is David Mitchell," a shaky voice said. "I need to report an accident. My wife, she fell in the bathroom. She's not breathing." When paramedics arrived 4 minutes later, they found Emma Rodriguez Mitchell lying on the marble bathroom floor in her silk nightgown. She had suffered massive head trauma. David was sitting on the bed, still in his tuxedo pants and white dress shirt, crying and saying, "It was an accident," over and over. But paramedics immediately noticed inconsistencies. The blood spatter patterns didn't match a fall. There were defensive wounds on Emma's hands. And most telling of all, David had no blood on his clothes despite claiming he had tried to help her. When police arrived, David's story began falling apart. He claimed Emma had slipped and hit her head on the marble counter, but the coroner would later determine that her injuries required multiple blows from a blunt object. He said he had immediately called for help, but phone records showed a 12-minute gap between the estimated time of death and his call to the front desk. Most damning of all, David couldn't explain why Emma's wedding ring was found clutched in her hand, as if she had pulled it off during a struggle. As police investigated David's background, the full scope of his deception emerged. Detectives discovered the second apartment, the separate bank accounts, and eventually Linda. Linda's reaction was captured on police body cam footage that would later be played at David's trial. When officers arrived at her house at 6 a.m. to inform her of the situation, she was frantic with worry about her missing husband. "David Mitchell is your husband?" the detective asked. "Yes, we've been married 23 years. He never came home last night, and he's not answering his phone. Something terrible must have happened. Ma'am, your husband got married yesterday." Linda's confusion was genuine and heartbreaking. "That's impossible. David is already married. To me." When shown photos from Emma's wedding, Linda collapsed. There was her husband of 23 years, exchanging vows with another woman, wearing the same smile he had given her on their wedding day decades earlier. The investigation revealed that David had been planning to murder Emma for weeks. He had researched ways to make deaths look accidental. He had taken out a life insurance policy on Emma just 2 months before the wedding, naming himself as the beneficiary. Most chilling of all, investigators found evidence that Emma wasn't David's first victim. They discovered he had been corresponding with 2 other women online, using the same widower story, the same claims about his tragic past. David Mitchell was charged with first-degree murder, bigamy, and fraud. The trial lasted 6 weeks and captivated the nation. Prosecutors painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer who had murdered his new wife when she threatened to expose his lies. They argued that David couldn't afford to have his double life revealed because it would have destroyed his relationship with Linda and exposed him to criminal charges. The defense claimed it was a crime of passion, that David had panicked when confronted and acted without thinking. They portrayed him as a man who had gotten in too deep and made a terrible mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented phone records showing David's careful planning, financial documents proving his elaborate deceptions, and testimony from witnesses who described his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks before the wedding. Most powerful of all was Linda's testimony. She described 23 years of marriage to a man she thought she knew, only to discover that half his life had been a complete fabrication. "I keep asking myself how I could have been so blind," she said through tears. "How could I share a bed with someone for over 2 decades and not know who he really was?" The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding David Mitchell guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emma Rodriguez Mitchell was buried in the same dress she wore as a bridesmaid in her sister's wedding 3 years earlier. Her family requested that she be remembered not as a victim, but as the loving, trusting woman who saw the best in everyone. Linda Mitchell filed for divorce while David was awaiting trial. She told reporters she felt like she had been married to a ghost, someone who never really existed. "I keep wondering what else he lied about," she said. "Were any of our memories real? Did he ever love me, or was I just convenient?" The 2 other women David had been courting online came forward after his arrest. Both described the same pattern of behavior: the tragic widower story, the expensive gifts, the gradual isolation from family and friends. Experts who studied the case said David exhibited classic traits of a psychopathic personality: superficial charm, pathological lying, and a complete lack of empathy for his victims. As we close this devastating story, it's important to recognize the red flags that might have saved Emma's life. David's reluctance to involve Emma in wedding planning wasn't romantic. It was calculated to avoid creating evidence of bigamy. His mysterious work schedule and private phone calls weren't signs of a dedicated professional. They were evidence of a double life. His tragic backstory about his deceased wife wasn't meant to elicit sympathy. It was a manipulation tactic to prevent Emma from questioning his past. His insistence on keeping their relationship separate from his family wasn't about protecting Emma from painful memories. It was about protecting his lies from exposure. This case raises so many disturbing questions about trust, deception, and how well we really know the people closest to us. Have you ever discovered that someone important in your life was lying about something significant? How did you handle it? What warning signs do you think people should watch for in relationships? And here's the question that haunts me most. If Emma had survived that confrontation and learned the truth about David's double life, what do you think she should have done? Would you have been able to forgive such a massive deception, or would it have been an unforgivable betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights and experiences might help someone else recognize the warning signs before it's too late. If this story affected you, please remember that domestic violence resources are available. No one deserves to be deceived, manipulated, or harmed by someone they trust. And if you want to hear more cases like this, stories that will make you question everything you think you know about human nature, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the truth is, monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the perfect husband, the ideal neighbor, the charming stranger who spills coffee on your shirt. Sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one you trust completely. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, it's always better to ask the hard questions than to ignore the red flags.